welcome to that DV show, The Stream, where we talk about all things business, technology and people. Today we're joined by a man who spends his time helping young people find purpose in their life and the rest of his time helping organizations find insights in their data. Suraj Pabari, welcome to The Stream.
Thank you.
Suraj is partner at data analytics consultancy SingleView. And it's great to have you here, mate. Really looking forward. We've had quite a bit of interest about this topic. So it's obviously something that is on everyone's radar at the moment, understanding customers, what they value and how to serve them better. And it is, I guess something for everyone who's dialing in. I want you to have a think about who your customers are and what they value and how you are serving them at the moment, how you might be able, and what value they bring to your business as well. So today, Suraj is going to be taking us through how to measure the lifetime value of a customer. And you'll see how the long-term perspectives of this result in saving costs on advertising spend, and also in obviously increased sales and customer experience and brand loyalty as well, for that matter. Surprisingly, this approach is not that well adopted. So by the end of this session, hopefully you'll be able to walk away with insights or an idea of a way to implement this analytics model into your organization to bring more value to your customers. So let's get started. But before, I just wanted to quickly chat about customer centricity and understanding the value of customers, and especially in the online space at the moment. And why is that kind of important now more than ever? I mean, I'm just wondering why people are so interested. I mean, it's like an interesting topic, but why do you think that is, Luke?
Yeah, I think it's always been important, right? I mean, every business, they have to know their customer, have to value their customer. This is like key to a successful business. But now we're in 2020. Everybody's been locked up at home. If the world was online before that, it is super online now. There's a lot of competition for online customers. We want people to keep on coming back to us. How do we look after them? How do we understand the value of those people coming to us, right, Suraj?
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, I think it's really important to think about valuing those customers, but also driving growth to your business. If you were to give a discount to everyone, it wouldn't be the best approach to drive long-term revenue growth for your business. So there's two pillars you've really got to be thinking about: driving that customer centricity, but also driving growth for your business.
Yeah.
Okay, so why do you feel why are you in this space? Why do you find it important? Why are we here talking about this?
So I can show you through an example, actually. It might be easier to just demonstrate through an example that I had prepared. So, as you probably know, Jason, I'm a pretty pleasant guy, but there are there are times when
I heard the story.
there are times when too much of a good thing can become a bit annoying, and I'll show you what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So I want you to imagine that you are an AFL marketing manager. Right? Everyone's been stuck at home for such a long time because of COVID, and you want to get people out to watch the latest AFL game, and your job is to do that through advertising. Now, there are two offers that you could show. Number one would be special offer half-price tickets, and number two would be meet the players and get a signed jersey. And you'd also be willing to pay different amounts based on the offer. That second one is slightly more expensive. Now, which offer do you think works better, Jason?
It would depend what I value, right? I mean, for me, I'm not the biggest fan, but I'd be interested in meeting some of the players, I suppose.
Yeah, I think your answer is, I think you've seen this before, which is why you probably got the right answer.
Actually, I didn't think about that. I was just rereading it again, like, as it happens.
Yeah, but your answer is actually correct. There isn't really a right answer here.
So essentially, it's a waste of money spending the same amount of ad spend on yourself, who's not going to, end up spending money as I would, and you've spent essentially the same amount of money on both of us, even though I'm actually worth a lot more to the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's another way of looking at your ROI on your ad spend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, so, wow, how can we get the most bang for our buck? And it's like understanding these two types of AFL supporters.
Yeah.
In this
But
case,
so for someone like yourself, Jason, you'd probably be more interested in having a signed jersey. Someone like me, I'd love that discount. And so therefore you can see how a different strategy would actually result in profitable return for both of us. Other slides actually back on.
I was just going to
that.
ask so what are you seeing, while that's getting back up, what are you kind of seeing in the marketplace at the moment? Are organizations actually applying this as we are talking about it? Or are most organizations saying what you're doing before, going out to everyone with one message and then just seeing who bites?
Yeah, and I think...
who's using this? Who's doing this?
So having worked with a lot of leading advertisers and large advertisers within Australia, there's only a few who are really integrating this within their organization. And I think there's a few barriers actually that we're finding. If we think about people, process and platforms, if we think about using that framework, we look at people, the incentives are aligned around driving acquisition. Driving as much acquisition as possible. You look at someone like Uber, who's initially just trying to drive as many customers to use their app as possible, as quickly as possible. And you can't really blame the companies for this. You look at the stock market and the investors, and it's all relying on those quarterly earnings. So long-term results and reporting isn't as important. So we've kind of got a really big people problem
so
there.
if people have their, if people have their bonuses maybe attached to a stock price, then they're going to be looking at, well, what's going to make that go up? And there's going to be more new customers.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, and then so, boy, is that a good long-term decision? Maybe not.
Yeah,
maybe not to focus exclusively on that to the exclusion of, how can we keep these people coming back? Or we're getting some competitors now. How can we win our customers over the long term?
Yeah, for sure. And I look at SingleView. So SingleView is a data consultancy. And I'm actually just going to go back to the slides because I think they actually do a really good way of actually demonstrating what I'm trying to show. So because you guys didn't see the beautiful slide before, I'm actually going to go back one slide because I spent a lot of time on this slide and I'd really like to show you guys my amazing artwork. So this is Jason, as I mentioned earlier, loving the signed jersey, loving the AFL. And this is me who, as I mentioned earlier, I don't really know what the AFL is. Thought it looked a little bit like this. And for me, that offer isn't as relevant. Now, where I was actually getting to was that we actually look at the value of every single customer, and you can see those 5 bars there. The one on the left is the most valuable, and the one on the right is the least valuable. What is the average value of these customers? And we set a cost at that. So overall, we're making profit on these customers, but we're losing money on the other customers. And you might be thinking, that's not too bad. We're break even overall. But what tends to happen is all those customers that you're acquiring leave. Cost per acquisition starts increasing and you start finding it harder and harder to acquire customers, i.e. you get too much of me and not enough Jason. And we all want a bit of Jason for our business. And so in the long run, this is the approach you want to start thinking about. You want to start thinking about if we can optimize to the higher lifetime value customers, in the long run, our revenue is going to be higher. And that's what matters for both investors, but it also matters for the long-term growth of your business.
That's what people talk about when they talk about churn, right? There's customers going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, and never building up that customer base long-term.
Yeah, exactly that. And you look at Uber as an example, right? So Uber, I would argue, has gone through that growth phase and that acquisition is becoming more expensive. So they're focusing a lot more on that retention at this stage. I don't know if any of you have opened Uber lately, but they've got this loyalty scheme. I'm apparently a blue Uber member. So what they're trying to focus on is actually that long-term retention of their customers.
Yeah, okay. Because they have had like other people come into the market, right? And even the taxi companies have picked up their game a little bit. And so now they have to go out and fight for that. Yeah, absolutely.
And the problem is, and I'll just shift to another slide actually. Give me one second. Can they see the slides, Chris? Yeah, cool. I'm just going to go skip to another slide because I think it's actually pretty relevant. We have this company, Blue Apron. Blue Apron's a meal delivery company. And what they do is they provide meal packs for people who can cook at home. And you might see these on George Street. Walking down George Street, they're handing out vouchers to give you $20 off your meal. This company had a valuation of $2 billion after 5 years. Pretty amazing. They were acquiring a lot of customers. But you can see from that graph what happened to their customers. By focusing so much on acquisition, they ended up losing half of their customers. Stock price went from about $150, it's now $9.
So they were spending money on people who you essentially weren't a long-term customer.
Exactly. And the actual ex-CEO is quoted as saying, Blue Apron doesn't retain customers very long. The cost to acquire customers has been on the rise lately. And if the company is attracting a lot of customers whose lifetime values do not exceed cost, then it has a problem. So
Yeah, that becomes a no-win situation then, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's just your costs are always going to increase no matter how hard you try to bring in that revenue.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that because, and I'm going to go back a few slides. So I know we're kind of skipping around a little bit. I'm going to go back a few slides, and I just want to actually show you an example of how we do this at SingleView. So as I mentioned, we're a data consultancy, and our customer base looks a little bit like this. So what this is showing is that we have a few clients who are driving a lot of revenue. We're forming that trusted advisor relationship with them, and we're actually working with them quite closely. And then we have a lot of clients where we're doing 1 or 2 projects with them, maybe an audit, and they're potentially not going to be a high value customer to us, but we're still working with them. So Igor and I had a bit of a debate about maybe we should just focus on this type of client. The high value clients, we don't have an overhead, and then we don't have as many clients to manage.
Yeah.
And we were thinking, is that the right approach? And what we were thinking was, and a really good way to think about this is imagine you're a fisherman.
Sure.
Imagine you're a fisherman, right? And you have 2 ways of catching fish. You can either use a net, and a net would drag that along the bottom of the ocean and catch as many fish as possible, with the result that some fish may be good fish, some fish might not be so good. Or you can spearfish. Find the best places in the ocean and actually use your spear to actually try and find those fish that you really like, with the risk that you might not capture any fish at all. So what should you focus on? Should you focus on the nets, or should you focus on the spear? In reality, a truly customer-centric captain focuses on both, right? And I'm sure you guys have experienced this in your business, where you don't just want to focus on the highest value customers, you want that cash flow to come from the net at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's always, keeping the cash flow going, because it takes time. The bigger fish often take a lot of time to come through anyway. So it's covering all bases.
Yeah.
I don't know if I describe our customers that way, but yes, we can take the analogy. Yes, scraping the bottom of the ocean. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, every customer comes with their particular needs, and obviously we never want to be in a position of saying no, we only serve these kinds of customers, because it's good to be able to provide value across the board.
There could be a bit of an if in there, because you do need to it's probably a separate conversation actually, but of choosing the people that you work with. I think that's quite an important thing as well. So I guess in an ideal world, I don't know how you filter a net like that, but anyway, let's keep moving. So we keep moving.
Let's go. Yeah. And so I mean, what I can actually talk about. So we've kind of talked about the importance of high lifetime value customers and actually trying to find them, but also having that base. You want that cash flow, right? You wouldn't invest all your money in Tesla, even though the stock price is shooting up, because you actually want to invest some money in index funds. You want to have that cash flow. And think of lifetime value a bit like that, right? You don't want to spend all your money on the Teslas of the world. You want to have those index funds to provide you with that cash so that you can make those big bets once in a while.
Yeah, so it's like a risk management approach as well.
Portfolio management, risk management, exactly.
Absolutely. Sure.
And one thing which is what we work on a lot is actually how do you calculate that? A lifetime value, it seems like a fairly simple thing to calculate. Why not just look at how much someone spent? So I'll talk through a few actually pitfalls with actually taking that approach. Let's just shift to the right slide. So spend over 180 days, because a lot of customers will kind of use that as a default. And obviously what matters is the buying cycle of your business, right?
Yeah.
If you're an auto retailer, it might be slightly longer as opposed to someone who's just buying beauty products.
Sure. Okay. So it's going to be different for different businesses. And so they're always going to use that kind of time period for, evaluating the value of a customer. That's most appropriate for them and how people buy their products.
But not only that, not just that, but you also want to think about, I don't want to wait 180 days to understand if a campaign performed really well.
Yeah.
You want to find that right balance. So a lot of companies actually I've seen go for 60 days. So rather than just looking at the first purchase, you go for 60 days, spend over 60 days.
Okay, yeah. So that's like making sure that that return on investment, you get the results sooner rather than later.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But interestingly, that's not always the best approach. And I'll give you an example from we were working with a hospitality client. And the hospitality client actually had customers that looked a bit like this. They had a few clients, like that top example, that would be spending a lot of money and then not spend again. And they'd have customers who would be spending more frequently. And by thinking of all these different types of customers the same, what actually ended up happening is they provide their concierge VIP service to their highest value customers, and they were providing it to all these types of customers. Whereas in reality, that top customer was someone who was over from Singapore on a business trip, spent a lot of money on a client meeting, and then just didn't come back.
Sure.
So they're giving them all these kinds of offers and sending them whiskey on their birthdays and things like that, where it didn't really make that much difference because that customer was in another country and not coming back. And so it kind of brings us down to the kind of really important concept within lifetime value modeling, which is the recency, frequency, monetary value. What do I mean by that? Well, recency is when was the last time the customer bought for your business? If they bought a long time ago, then they're probably likely to be considering churning. You might want to find out what's going on in that situation. Frequency is how often they bought, and monetary value is how much they spent. So you start thinking about these different factors independently, because they each tell you something different about the customer, and the action that you might take would be different. If someone's frequency is low, you probably want to encourage them to come back more often. Someone hasn't come for a long time, you want to do some kind of churn reduction strategy.
Yeah. If obviously you're going to take all of those into account, but do you think different businesses would value one more than the other potentially? Like put a bit more weight on it, not to the exclusion of the others, but do you think that would be the case?
Yeah, for sure. And I think if we look at an industry like, let's say a telco, like let's say I take Vodafone as an example, frequency isn't as important because people are paying their monthly contracts every month. They're paying their contracts, so frequency is fairly consistent. What's really important for a business like that is the amount they're spending on their contract. And that's the key distinction between a high and a low value customer. Contrast that with beauty. In beauty, I worked with a few beauty clients, and apparently monetary value isn't as important. People spend around the same amount, but it's the frequency at which they come back, which is the key distinguisher between high and low value.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's a super interesting industry then, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But you might think rather than treating them all equally, you start thinking about which of these factors, recency, frequency, monetary value, become more important. And then we want to start looking at other factors as well. Is the age of the customer an indicator of their lifetime value? I was working with a beauty client recently and looking at stuff like the skin type and the hair type and things like that all correlate with lifetime value.
Okay, yeah. And so you're going to do like some more kind of advanced statistical modeling maybe around customers and customer attributes when you're getting beyond like the 3 dimensions. In that case.
So effectively, I mean, what I wanted to actually show is how probably anyone who's watching this live stream can actually do a basic recency, frequency, monetary value segmentation themselves. Because effectively what they would do is they would develop a matrix like this, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. So if you look at a frequency with a score of 5 is the top 20% of customers, the customers who are coming back the most. You look at a recency of 5, that's the customers that came back most recently. And so that 5 and 5, that black square is the sweet spot. But it actually gets a little bit more complex than that because you want to start adding in the monetary value. Right? So you've got a bit of a cube. You've got 5 up on a scale of 1 to 5 on each of these 3 dimensions. And then let's say, for example, you have a customer who's 5, 5, 5. These are your superstar customers. Imagine you're in a relationship, right? You've had a really good first date with this person, constantly coming back. Every single date is really good. Probably looking to marry them. And you can think of how this applies in the LTV world with customers as well. But then contrast that to a customer like this one. High frequency, high monetary value, a really low recency. You had some great dates with this person, but they just haven't responded to your messages. They're not coming back. What did you do wrong? So with the customer lens on lifetime value, you want to try and understand why they're not coming back and try and do some churn reduction in this specific case. And what you end up with is some kind of segmentation where you have the superstar customers, You have the low spending loyal customers potentially who have high recency, high frequency, but not spending that much, to which you want to upsell. And finally, you have those customers who may have churned.
Okay, so this is very interesting and a great way to obviously, analyze, customers and customer behavior, but that implies also a lot of collection of data and a lot of analysis as well, right? Do you think that's an easy thing for companies to get started with?
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you should ask, because what we have done here actually on the next slide is we've created a template just to make it a little bit easier. So effectively with this template, all you need to do is just enter in your date, customer ID, and the value. So let's say 1st of January, customer ID 1234, spent $50. So your transaction logs, just copy and paste it into the spreadsheet. I think you can only put 5 to 10,000 rows at this stage, but it's just good to get an idea. And what it will spit out is what's the recency, frequency, and monetary value. So that recency is days, as you can see in that example. You also get what segments they belong to. So you can see high, medium, low recency, frequency, monetary value. And we've even just kind of pre-created a couple of segments that we have. So we've got all the customer IDs there and a couple of segments which you can just copy and paste and use with your marketing.
Okay, so that sheet will create those reports based on the input into that table that's on the left-hand side. Oh, that's incredible.
Yes.
And would you apply this is this relevant to all businesses? Or, I mean, it's obviously going to be most meaningful to e-commerce sites or, any kind of online transactions, but, and especially like businesses that have an extremely low frequency, whether it's buying a car or these kinds of things. How would you, does that change the way it's applied?
So I would actually think of that slightly differently, perhaps. So if you're looking at a more long-term view, as you mentioned, something like buying a car, you buy once every 2 years, probably less relevant to start thinking about these three things. But what you might try and understand is, for a typical car buyer that's spending a lot of money, what attributes are the most relevant for them? Are they generally someone who lives in Sydney CBD? Are they generally someone who visits 7 pages on the website and searches for this specific car brand? And you can start inferring whether someone's going to buy a car based on that behavior. And the eventual goal, actually, and I'll show you where we kind of want to get to, and I'll just kind of skip through a couple of slides here, is actually move your whole business towards lifetime value. Start shifting everything, the way you start thinking about things, towards lifetime value. As an example, this on the right-hand side is a wondersuit. I don't have kids myself, but apparently a wondersuit is something that kids love. But when you buy a wondersuit, obviously your kid gets bigger and you buy new wondersuits and you keep buying more clothing. So I was working with a baby retailer back at Google, and what we noticed is this company was making a loss on the wondersuit. So we were wondering, why would you keep investing in the wondersuit if every time you acquire a customer, you lose money? But what they were noticing is, if someone buys a wondersuit when their kid is younger, as their kid starts getting older, they'll constantly become loyal to that brand, and they'll constantly be buying more and more and more.
Size 1, size 2, size 3, etc.
Exactly.
Okay.
To start thinking about that longer term period, and products which seem unprofitable are actually profitable.
Okay, so that's also about building up that relationship then, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's coming back to that idea of, we're not just kind of like segmenting our customers, but we're creating a reason for them to develop a relationship with us, so that we understand them, we understand what they value, and then obviously they can get that value from our services as well, right?
Exactly. And a really good example, when I was doing a bit of research, I found this company called Bambu Earth, who do a lot of beauty products. And initially they had a really low conversion rate, low average order value. It wasn't profitable for them to run marketing and acquire customers. They were like, what do we do? A few years later, they drove 29x revenue in e-commerce profitability. So they pretty much blew their business out of the water, right? And how did they do that? It was looking at 60-day lifetime value. So what do I mean by that? Well, they looked at the first product that someone purchased, and rather than just looking at the purchase value, they looked at how much that customer was going to spend over a period of time. So as an example, you look at moisturizer. Apparently moisturizer, the LTV on a moisturizer is quite strong. So even if the cost to acquire that customer is really high, Bambu Earth would still acquire that customer because they knew over 60 days they would double or triple their spend. And I think the CEO was quoted as saying, metrics that first indicated losses from paid media were actually profitable over a longer time period. We just needed to track what customers did after they'd made their first purchase. And what we discovered was that they were doubling and tripling their value after 90 to 120 days. And that became their kind of motto. Every part of the business, they have a skin quiz. It's all around driving that lifetime value of the business, the landing page, the experience, because they knew that's what drives long-term growth.
Okay, the skin quiz, that was a thing on their website. They bring customers back to do something. On the
and
site.
also understand their customers, right? They understood a bit more about their customers, which they could then use to infer the value of their customers.
Okay.
So what are some other ways of actually understanding what customers actually value other than through purchasing? I mean, is that something, does all of lifetime value modeling come down to transaction data?
No, it's interestingly, and back to the beauty example, RFM was the first way we worked with a client and tried to build that RFM model. But beyond that, they were actually interested in if someone has oily skin, are they likely to be a high lifetime value customer or low life, based on the types of products they were looking at.
Okay.
Or if they were slightly older, or if they were looking at specific types of moisturizers. So any type of attribute you can collect about a customer will tell you whether they're high or low value. It's just about building that model to try and predict it.
Okay. Yeah. The Bambu Earth people, they must have been pretty brave in the first, I don't know, few weeks, 30 days or something, seeing the big losses on the initial spend and waiting for it to come rolling back through.
It's a bit of a commitment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you're spending money with, to learn, I suppose, really, isn't it? It's like, well, hopefully on the other side of this, we will be able to understand what they value and be able to market to them more effectively.
And not just for the company, but for the investors in the company as well, right?
Yeah.
They need to be able to trust the company. I mean, you look at some of companies like Google and Amazon, people were investing in those companies, especially Amazon, and they weren't actually making any money because they knew it was more of a long-term game. Over the long run, they're building this customer base, which is actually going to be a highly profitable customer base.
Yeah.
And does, typically how long might an organization expect before they can kind of gather these insights? Is it always around 60 days, like a minimum kind of thing? Or what other kind of campaigns do you see, like a typical kind of campaign that an organization might adopt?
Well, as I said, I haven't actually seen much experience within Australia of companies working to these longer time periods. But from a few examples, we've seen 60 days being quite a common one. Just being is that like it's a boundary between too long that you can actually make any insights and actually take any action, but long enough to get some insight about your customers.
Okay. Do you think it'd be worthwhile a company like adopting 60 days initially and then sort of creating a longer moving window over time to understand those campaigns and efforts?
So, interestingly with Bambu Earth, what they realized is a customer would double their spend. So they'd make a first purchase, but they double their spend within 60 days and they triple it within 120 days. Right. So that initial period is actually it's a good indicator to suggest how much they might spend over a longer period of time. Another industry, you're talking about other industries where this is pretty common, was the betting industry. Having worked with a couple of betting clients, I think what's important for them is they look at the behavior. What types of bets are you doing? What does it suggest? Does it suggest you know a lot about betting? And can we infer what your lifetime value will be based on whether you did like a trifecta or you just do a single bet or you do bets which don't make sense? Like, and you can use that to infer what the lifetime value of a customer might be.
It gets quite into the psychology of the customer, doesn't it? I mean, how much of that, of actually understanding the data is, do you need a bloody psychology degree just to understand what you're looking at a lot of the time? Or how do you, I guess it's a fascinating space where, we're in this world now where there is such enormous amounts of data and using models like this and others, what you can learn from that is amazing. How much of psychology is involved in what you do?
I would argue not that much. Yeah. So I look at something like, and even the way we approach our, like trying to understand who's a high value customer. There's specific characteristics of customers who we would assume to be a high value customer based on the data sophistication, based on the amount of data they have, based on the type of industry they're in. Even if we look at the AFL example, right? How can we find more Jasons, or how can we find more people like yourself to drive long to high lifetime value customers within the AFL? We might go to Manly Beach and just park ourselves there and find anyone with blonde hair. But so we can actually use the data to tell us what those attributes might be, right? We don't need to have that knowledge.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay then. Do you think I'm just thinking about, because there's upcoming changes I'm thinking about, particularly with online marketing. the way that third-party cookies, for instance, are going to be treated in the future. So do you think there's a lot of value in like concentrating on what customers do on your site so that you can see firsthand rather than trying to infer things from their behavior elsewhere on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think
Yeah.
we can't be relying on that third-party cookie data. I think the most important thing right now is to build up your own customer base and start capturing all that data, right? A lot of customers have a lot of rich data on their website about where people are clicking, but it's not captured or stored anywhere. So having some kind of data warehousing solution, some kind of database where you can store all the customer interaction data, that becomes your first-party data, which you can then use at some other point when you do need to use it.
That's a big question though, isn't it? About, because obviously data is extremely bountiful and we can find it everywhere, and there's a lot of different things to track with customers. How do you think businesses get started understanding customer data and customer behavior?
I mean, what I find, I think often potentially a problem could be people want the most complex machine learning based model. And I see this so much time. They want what they call the Death Star of models. But often they don't need that. And even the simple spreadsheet will give you an idea of your lifetime value and your RFM of your customers. I think it's really important to think about, let's say the data was perfect and I got exactly what I wanted to get from this data. What action will I take? Is my business set up to take those actions? Do I have the resources in place? Do I have the expertise in place? If you can't answer those questions in the affirmative, then you probably don't, it's probably not the right time for you at that stage.
Wow, because there could be a lot of barriers, like internally, right? To do it. We've discussed that before about those sorts of barriers, but it's even just, well, what are the things that we need to tick off internally in our organization before we can really get started on this?
And I think what's really important to know is what potential actions could you take, right? I mean, you have, let's say, for example, you figured out the lifetime value of your customers. You know who your high value customers are. You know who your low value customers are. You need to start changing the action, targeting the action based on what type of customer you're targeting. And I'll give you an example of that, actually. The example I wanted to actually talk about was Amazon. We all know Amazon, and they started by selling books. And you might be asking, why did they start by selling books? Well, one of the reasons is you don't generally refund a book. A book is always a book, right? But actually, one of the really nuanced reasons that I didn't realize until I started researching this was that Jeff Bezos assumed that people who buy books are slightly higher income, they're from a higher income bracket, and they would be a great set of customers to start with at Amazon. And what he says was, those interested in purchasing books are relatively affluent, and thus sales to these customers provided infinite opportunities to mine information about the behaviors of a highly valuable segment of online customers. So you can see how he was thinking about it at that stage. He went into electronics next. I wonder why, right? They're the high value customers. And it leads me to actually an interesting point. We often say it costs 5 times as much to acquire a customer as it does to retain a customer. But I want you to think about it slightly differently. Whilst that's true, you actually have more control over the kinds of customers you bring in, as opposed to trying to change them once they've been brought into the business. Even if I was brought into the business, I'm not suddenly going to become a lifelong AFL fan. But if you were to bring in yourself, Jason, instead of me in the first place, it would help the business in the long run. So trying to understand for your business, what is the book of like the book for Amazon Books? What is the equivalent? What is that product, like the moisturizer for Bambu Earth, that really, really drives a high lifetime value and can tell you a lot about the customer?
Like, how are you going to target your ideal customer to?
And what product? If someone bought a specific car or specific product, does that mean they're a high lifetime value customer? And can you infer that? Even in your industry, what types of services would they participate in if they were to be a high value customer? And can you start thinking of those customers slightly differently?
This is like quite a high level strategic sort of question, isn't it? And it could potentially reshape a business. Do you think this is always going to become a whole of business activity, really starting to consider lifetime value?
For sure. I mean, I think people are also expecting, the good thing about thinking about lifetime value is you can start treating customers differently and giving them what they want. So as an example, let's say you had these segments. So let's say, for example, you created a couple of segments for your customers. So this is what we tried with a beauty client. You had 3 different segments for your customers. As I said, with the beauty industry, we have Rare Robin, who's low frequency, and that was a really big problem for them. So they want to start bringing customers back. But then what do you do with these segments? Well, there's a couple of actions you could take. This is quite a useful matrix. It's from a book called Customer Centricity Playbook by a guy called Dr. Peter Fader. Really, really interesting book talking about all things lifetime value. But the way he describes it is, if someone's loyal to your business, don't give them a discount, right? If I love, let's say, Starbucks already, giving me a discount isn't going to make me come back more. I'm already coming to Starbucks. Back to that hospitality example, if someone loves your brand and they're coming to all your bars and restaurants, they don't want 50% off necessarily. They want you to treat them well. They want you to give them a bottle of whiskey on their birthday. You know what whiskey they like, just send it to them. That kind of approach, it's like an airport lounge, that type of approach. Whereas if I don't care where I get coffee, I'm a low value coffee client, then giving me that 50% off my coffee will help me come into your coffee store.
Yeah, about getting that person through the door. That's the battle with them.
Yeah, for sure. And then even thinking about churn reduction, right? If someone's not come to your business for a long time, this is what I've called strategic account management. It's about understanding, talking to them. They're a high value customer and they've just stopped coming. Why might that be? So rather than focusing on churn reduction across all your customers, focus on the ones where there's the most value in bringing them back.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess this kind of goes back to the whole customer centricity piece, but in this, world full of people and data now, and it seems, the more you can actually hone in and really find your big fish, I suppose, that you can focus on and provide more attentions to and more a customized service to is going to be better for the business in the long run.
Yeah.
I have a question here and probably relating more, well, I'll just read it out. I love the concept of RFM. Would you be able to share what is the best way for small to medium sized businesses to build reliable predictive models like this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because we're working with a lot of small, medium businesses who are kind of going down that path. I think as a first stage, my business partner often says sometimes a pivot table is good enough. And I almost feel like as a first stage, just thinking about a really, really simple model that you can build, whether it's with the spreadsheet that we shared, or even just looking at something a lot simpler, like do customers who are from Sydney versus Melbourne, which ones spend the most, let's say, for example, and using that to try and see what actions you might take, run an experiment. And then after that, trying to think of a more sophisticated machine learning predictive model that you could build. Because often not having enough data could be a big problem with a smaller business.
That's what I was going to ask, because we're kind of referring mostly to the bigger organizations who, have big data lakes, they're not in short supply of that, which is quite valuable. But for, I guess, businesses not necessarily just getting going, but don't collect a lot of data, what are the kind of actions they might be able to do to start gathering these insights?
Yeah. One of the things could be something similar to the skin quiz that Bambu Earth did. Start interviewing your customers and start asking them what types of things they like, and make sure there's some value in it for them as well, whether it's personalized offers or whatever it might be. Something we sometimes set up with a lot of our clients is a lot of analytics platforms actually automatically share a lot of that customer interaction data. So if someone comes onto your website and clicks 5 different times and spends 2 minutes on your website, that's actually shared within a data warehouse, and a lot of analytics platforms provide that type of insight. So having that data is really useful in the long run, because then you have that historical data, rather than saying, okay, I want to build a model now. Well, you don't have any data. Let's start collecting it now. Starting that earlier on, and you can always find uses for that data.
So seeing what you can turn on now that'll serve you a few months down the track.
For sure. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
How much, it's like, I'm just kind of interested to have a quick chat about, it's a little bit off topic, but it's still related, of organizations understanding their data, and especially these kinds of insights, being able to develop new products and value propositions around these. In your experience, how connected are those different departments for, like in product development or whatever, or engineering, whatever it might be, to data and marketing? To how well is that typically managed, or
like how are they siloed? Are they siloed? Are they integrated across the organization?
So I'm just are the kind of insights that we're talking about here, are they being developed into more meaningful offers outside of marketing?
So the experience that I've had is not as much, and I think one of the problems you touched upon there, Luke, was that there are often silos between different departments and different teams. You've got the retention team, you've got the marketing team, you've got all the different types of teams, and the data isn't often connected. And even when they try to connect the data, there isn't that common key, that common ID that you can use to connect the data. And that's often a problem.
Yeah.
So that would almost be, when we'd work with clients, often just focusing on building that data foundation. But if you're building a house, I'm currently doing a renovation, and if I was to think about each different room individually, I'd have to do a lot of work again and again and again, rather than focusing on building that foundation, starting with that foundation, then anything I do beyond that becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, it's like making sure the pipes hook up, right?
Yeah.
We don't have one pipe here,
For
nothing
sure.
can go between them. So
Yeah.
the same with different, I guess, repositories of data within an organization. How can we relate them to each other so that we can see how the customer that turns up over here is the same customer that turns up somewhere else, and that same customer record can be kind of unified across the data. So that might imply the first step for an organization like that might be a bit of a data transformation activity, just so that they can get that insight into what's going on, right?
Yeah, for sure. And whether it's working with someone else or even getting someone internally to build that based on, and I think the best way to do it is actually build it from the ground up, speak to everyone about the way they're using their data, try and understand what the core use cases are and build the data so that it helps with those use cases, right? And then it's all about the training the team, because a lot of this wouldn't necessarily be available in a dashboard. So some basic technical skills might be necessary to pull the data, but just having that level of education, I think, really helps to get people the data they want when they want it.
Yeah.
With the lifetime value modeling, is there, we kind of touched on it before, like more or advanced analytics, but pulling data from other departments, is that something that you do a bit of, like to actually know more about the customer to be able to have a more accurate prediction?
Yeah, I mean, so often we do exactly that.
Right.
So exactly the building the data foundation, understanding the core use cases, and having an idea ourselves about different ideas they can basically use the data for, whether it's clustering the customers into different segments, whether it's building attribution models, or something that's really important at the moment and really relevant is what we call a propensity to purchase model. So what that means is, based on the behavior you've taken on the site, I can say you're 74% likely to purchase or 84% likely to purchase. And if you're really likely to purchase and you haven't, well, what can I do to push you over the line? So using those kinds of signals really helps.
Another question here, which is quite a good one, is customer lifetime value. Is it historic, predictive, or some kind of combination?
So interestingly, the example I shared, which is the spreadsheet, would be a historical.
Yeah.
It'd be based on the past, assuming that someone who has a high frequency in the past will have a high frequency in the future. And as I explained, that can be slightly deceptive in the sense something like certain industries that might not be as relevant. So ideally, the end goal, and I would start with something simple, but the end goal might be, this is my recency, this is my frequency, this is my monetary value, this is my 180-day spend. Now ask the model to tell me how much are each of these factors contributing to that end goal. So maybe frequency is really, really important. Monetary value isn't as important, and let the model determine that. But I think as a second stage or a third stage, that's probably where you want to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
And like how predictive, like I'm interested in kind of how far into the future can we tell of what people will, I don't know, value. I mean, how predictive is a lot of this?
So a lot of the models that we've built, we've kind of stick it to about 180 days. And the reason why is, as you can predict for a long, you can predict longer, but the accuracy starts decreasing. So you want to strike that right balance. I'd actually probably suggest slightly less than 180 days to start with. But again, it depends on the business, it depends on the amount of data you have, it depends on a number of these factors.
Okay. And would you see it as also as part of a business's activity to refine those models over time to feed back the new information about purchasing activity and customer attributes over time to make them more predictive?
I would 100% say,
Yeah.
but I'd also be very, very careful of falling in the trap where the model is the output. Like we'd often work with businesses and they say, hey, we want you to build the model. And I'd often take a step back and say, okay, that's not the output. That's like, your goal is to reduce churn.
Yeah.
Your goal is to increase lifetime value. A model is one approach to actually achieve that end goal. So as long as that's not your goal is actually to drive action. And I think what's really important in all these cases is experimentation, right? Let's say, for example, we know that this group of customers has high lifetime value. Let's say we want to test this giving whiskey on the birthday type experiment, right? So I take my high lifetime value customers and I split them into two, and I run a proper test and control and see whether there is a statistically significant impact on the amount they're going to spend with the business based on me giving them whiskey on their birthday, as a very simple example. So that testing, there needs to be a lot of testing constantly going on to make sure there is a difference, or whether it's just something that looks really cool, but doesn't really drive that much value.
Sure.
And with those, I mean, so how are these hypotheses for the experimentation being created? Are these, I mean, who kind of comes up with them, and how likely, how many kind of experiments do you think an organization might typically have to run to find something meaningful?
So so interestingly, a lot of this is aligned with what their biggest business objectives might be. So you look at a company's annual reports, they often have 3 or 4 big goals, and often they align quite nicely into a couple of hypotheses or experiments that we might run. I mean, in terms of experiments, I mean, you look at some of the bigger companies are running hundreds of experiments a day, right? The more the better. Like small experiments, like Google as an example, would look at what color blue would they use and try hundreds of different colors of blue just to figure out what the right type would be. So it really depends on your resource, but focusing obviously on the highest impact ones to start with would be the best way to go forward.
Okay. And do you think it'd be practical to run for, again, I'm thinking of like maybe smaller organizations who can't go in on a big bet on this. Do you think it's feasible or practical to run like a small pilot or something like that in order to be able to test their ability to bring customers back or to keep them coming back in a particular segment or a particular product line or something like that?
When we look at, there's a lot of different products out there. So let's say, for example, I know Google does a product called Optimize, but there's hundreds of products that customers can use quite simply to edit the landing page experience, like you said, for a small subset of customers, and change the offer on it. Maybe if you know someone's a high value customer, give them some kind of bigger incentive to actually purchase. Right, and you can actually do that quite simply without not that much coding, using one of these optimization tools. So that's like another easy experiment is emails. Emails is a fairly easy thing to create experiments with. Send a group of customers an email, send another group, don't send them an email, and you can start observing the difference. So what's the easiest test you can do to prove the concept before you start scaling it out?
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, that's like something that something somebody can sit down and do like right away, isn't it? You just like sit down, I'm going to email a pack of my customers or a segment of the customers that I've identified and see who responds to the offer, who clicks a link.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if that's one of the goals of your business, I would say setting up a specific experiment, and even before you've started building a model or anything, what is that experiment? What is that key thing that you could try? What does the success metric look like? What does a good look like? What does bad look like? And then setting that experiment and giving it a go is fairly not too complex to start with.
And that lets you try out the different offers, right? Because that's the other part of it. Maybe we've identified these customers who do have a potential for high lifetime value. What offer are they going to want most? That's the other part of the validation, isn't it?
Or even is an offer the best thing to do for these customers? I think that's the big thing. I was kind of researching when I'm working with a lot of businesses, a discount's not always the best way to bring people to the company.
Yeah, or I guess promotion of any kind, right? What are they going to respond to? What are they going to value?
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to make sure that anyone who's kind of watching this can walk away and then essentially go and apply these learnings to their organization, especially if they have a bunch of data to work with. Do you want to go back to that slide again? People might want to see it around and how can they access that? Oh, you provided the link. I don't know.
The link. Yeah, so what I might do then is just skip to the summary slide, because that effectively covers the main points that I covered. So number one, calculate the customer lifetime value. And we're talking about, if you're a smaller business, start with something simple. Use an RFM segmentation, create 3 segments, take different behavior for each of those 3 segments, keep it simple, and then potentially engage with a partner to try and build a more complex model. And I've put this link to the spreadsheet there as well.
So who might typically do that?
I would say this is probably be really useful, and who we've worked with is a lot of people in the marketing analytics space. So people who are kind of behind the data, but also supporting the marketing team and helping them come up with the right offers at the right time. And working with them to try and understand, you might know that a customer is high value, but it's the marketing team that knows, okay, for high value customers, these are the types of things they engage with. And that's just sometimes where we would struggle. Like we'd say, okay, these are your segments, but you have that domain knowledge for the beauty segment. You know what high value customers engage with. And that's about that kind of domain knowledge and speaking to the people who know it best and can suggest some experiments.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number two, it's just about focusing on the types of customers you acquire. Whether that involves finding blonde-haired surfers on Manly Beach or whatever it might be. Just thinking about how can you find your Amazon book? What is that book for you, and how can you acquire those types of customers? And number three, it's about varying that strategy based on the value of the customer.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I like that analogy of the book because I feel like that's something that every business can relate to. I mean, there's always going to be, they do have should have some unique value proposition that people are attracted to and something that is unique to them, and focusing in on what they do value, putting that forwards and attracting them and learning from them more and more what they learn from them to retain them longer and have them buy more, I suppose, purchase more.
And interestingly, even thinking about that with respect to measurement of marketing, right? I mean, for those of the listeners who are kind of in the marketing space, they've probably heard of a CAC, a customer acquisition cost.
Yeah.
And you want to look at how much revenue someone's driving over the customer acquisition cost to look at the return on ad spend. Well, why not start thinking about the lifetime value over the customer acquisition cost, right? You might find certain campaigns have customers don't spend that much and you spend a lot of money to acquire them, and that ratio doesn't look favorable. But then when you start looking over a longer period of time, that customer now becomes a lot better in terms of as a prospect.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because people always talk about those different measurements and metrics and how they can drive an organization's activities. And again, it's really going to come down to an organization's willingness to hold the line, looking at maybe CAC going up and waiting for LTV to go up to beat it.
And that's, I think, going back to the barriers, that's one of the big barriers, right?
Yeah.
When when you're creating a campaign, you can't wait 60 days for someone to actually spend the money and then say, hang on, this campaign didn't work. So this is where the prediction comes in better. If when you create this campaign, the customers actually bought the moisturizer, you know that already, and those customers are going to be high value, you can infer that this campaign is actually going to be a good campaign for you.
Yeah, it mitigates the risk. Okay. So, I suppose that's kind of it. It'd be interesting to hear any other questions that we might have that are coming in. But I think that's been a very insightful, session. It's just something that is, I'm just surprised that it's something that isn't adopted more, given that how much can actually save organizations by not spending money on the people who are not really interested in or of value to the business, and focusing on spending money on the people who you do want to attract or be part of your business, your customers. I think that is something very valuable that, especially now with how easy it is to access data and collect data, something that most organizations can apply and reap the rewards for.
Yeah, that's right. I just love that it's been very illuminating, also very actionable. We've got something now that we can use straight away to start understanding customers. I think that's really amazing, and it's just obviously a lot to learn about, but obviously there's a lot of benefit for organizations to gain from that.
And that's I'd actually just like to echo that. I think thinking about that one simple action, writing that action down, making sure everything is in place to take that action, and then doing the modeling, I would say probably would be the best way to go, because otherwise you end up with an amazing model which has 99% accuracy, but then you don't have the resource to actually take that action, and you've just spent a lot of money on something which wasn't that useful.
Okay, well, I suppose if there's anything you'd like to add or ask. So if you'd like to work with Suraj or Digital Village for that matter, if you're on the website, just go to the contact page, and here we are as well. Or reach directly out to singleviewteam.team. One last question though. Other than revenue, is engagement typically a metric used to measure success, for example, on social channels?
I would say with something like that, I mean, we'd have to show some kind of evidence that engagement does lead to revenue, in whether it's in the long run or whatever. There needs to be some kind of, I mean, we'd often use some kind of media mix modeling to prove the impact of that. But I mean, there definitely is a role for engagement and brand awareness and those types of metrics. But it would be good at some point to actually try and correlate those to overall revenue, whether that is through a media mix model or something simpler than that.
Yeah. So it kind of raises another question though. The value of a customer. Is it, so in this case, it seems it's like purely measured monetarily. You know, that's what we consider value. But, you know, there's, for sure, there is customers that bring more value to the business than purely just handing over cash. Is there different models of being able to measure that in some way? In a, you know, so if you know, there might be these people who might not buy that much, but they will be massive brand advocates and they'll be out there promoting the hell out of things. Is that something that can be accounted for, or is considered in these models?
Not specifically in these models, but that doesn't say there's a role. There's not a role for them. I mean, I like to think of everything in terms of data, but you're right. There is definitely a role for these brand advocates. I mean, the way we think about it, some of our highest value customers aren't necessarily ones we're doing work with, but one who are referring other higher value customers, and that's a perfect example of that. So there definitely needs to be a way to account for that, and I'm pretty sure you could find some data behind that. But even something simpler, will definitely work.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, Suraj. It's been a real pleasure.
No worries.
Again, if you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out. You'll be able to find Suraj on LinkedIn. Just search his name, you know how it works. Go to singleview.team or go to the contact page on the Digital Village website.
Sounds good.
See you next. Thanks again for the amazing team behind the scenes. Steve, Chris, and Gory. I just wanted to acknowledge you for that because there's a lot of work that goes into setting these things up. So thank you. And Luke, it's always fun, mate.
Oh, always a pleasure, guys.
And okay, we'll wrap up and we'll see you next month.
Perfect. Thank you.